Hi guys, welcome back to The Edge. Today I'm here with Katin Alexandru. Most of you that are listening probably have seen him on LinkedIn. He's an avid kind of speaker and commenter, and he's a very well-known kind of game economist. Just before we kind of jump into everything, I'd be really interested to know, because I'll be completely honest, I don't understand it that well. When you're a game economist, and even within the strata of game economists, I know this title can mean a lot of different things depending on where you're working and what you're doing. Like, what is that? What is it that, you do or specifically like enjoy doing within that?
Yeah, thanks, Caspian, for having me on, first of all. And yeah, it's a tough one. It's very ripe for for commentary, because there's this the classic economist is someone with a PhD who understands there's supply side and demand side kind of doctrines in economics, and they have this very classical kind of academic background. Maybe they've taught, maybe they've written books or whatever, and that's a certain kind of economist, and they get into all sorts of places. Like Uber has economists now, and in tech they are starting to gain ground. But that's not what a game economist is, even though kind of classic PhD economists are getting into games right now. But they tend to function more like monetization kind of specialists and data scientists than designing actual like new game economies, because the people who actually design game economies, they are economy designers, and that's different to game economists, and that's different to monetization specialists. Like, there are all these specialisms essentially in this. And it's I'm not a PhD economist. I'm not a classically trained economist. I didn't even study economics at uni. But what I have done is I have built game economies from the ground up, starting from first principles, from like putting system upon system until I get to something that shipped and players have engaged with, and they bought things within,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of stood the test of the market. So in that sense, I'm a game economist, as in I have built economies consciously that people within games that people have engaged with, but it's very much an applied kind of practical experience sort of thing, and not when you hear economist like PhD or whatever.
Gotcha.
That's basically it.
So, I mean, when it comes to the filter of that on your opinions or vision of the industry, and I know that you are definitely not shy about being vocal of the things that you don't like that are going on in the industry right now, and there's a lot to look at when there's a lot wrong with the industry. And I've spoken to people before who there's this whole kind of talk going on about the industry's changing a lot, hopefully for the better, but a lot of kind of old and not decrepit parts are not functioning well. We've got all these layoffs going on, and companies that have been doing poor processes for years, and it's kind of biting them in the foot now. How do you think that that affects your opinions on that? Are you doing it through the lens of being a game economist, or are you just doing it through the lens of someone that really loves the industry?
I mean, those to be um, I've been in the industry 20 years now.
Hmm.
My LinkedIn used to say nearly 20 years. This year it's gone 20 plus, because
Oh, congratulations.
I've hit my anniversary. And I started out in QA. I went through all these things. QA. I was a producer. I was a project manager. I've led product. I've done level design and game design in the very from AAA to mobile. I've done economy design and monetization design. So I have this very varied kind of experience, and in very much in every kind of area that you can think of, from AAA, Electronic Arts and Sega and whatnot, to small indie studios, to web, to just everything, free to play, premium, just a whole bunch of so this had to inform my work in game economy, which that this is kind of a focus that I've adopted over the past more or less 5 years or so, um, and that had to inform my perspective when working on the game economy side. But it's not necessarily like I don't come at it from the classic, gamer. A lot of game developers are gamers first, and they consider themselves gamers first, and that to me kind of constitutes a problem because that's thinking like a consumer. And that's very much kind of having certain biases and certain entitlements that consumers have, which is fine because they're consumers. Like
Hmm.
they should have biases. They are entitled to pay something, get a good experience back. That's all fine. But that's not a productive mindset necessarily when you're approaching something as a professional, as someone who is making a living off that industry. So to me, kind of saying, "Oh, a lot of that rhetoric around, oh, I'm a game developer, and game developers do this," is actually like I'm a gamer, and gamers want this, and gamers do this in disguise, which that rubs me the wrong way.
Mm.
So while I tried to have my development experience inform my kind of economy, perspective, my and I look at the labor dynamics. I look at kind of business strategies. I look at platform economics, and to do the plug here, I run a newsletter called Intrinsic Economies, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
But I talk about this in in detail, but I don't approach it from the side of oh, I'm a gamer, I'm a game developer who loves gamers and gaming, and the layoffs are bad because I'm not getting as many games, or the games are bad. It's not about that. It's very much about why are they happening? They're happening because of commoditization of games, because of business models changing, and because platforms are kind of changing as well. They're going from this model, from this old model, as you said, to kind of trying on new models, and not many of them are working.
Hmm.
That's kind of my perspective on things. Game dev plus actual business strategy, economics, and yeah, a market view of things, because we live in capitalism, and that's how things work. It's a business. We make money
Yeah.
to live. So yeah.
I mean, you kind of segued perfectly into what I was going to talk about next, anyways. There, which is so my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong. So up until about 2022, you were in a head of games position, but at the moment, you're essentially doing kind of your own work and some contract work and some freelance work with like various people, and it's essentially just get the freedom of that, but also that's just where you're at the moment right now.
Consultancy has been going, like, that's been an ongoing concern even when I was in sort of full-time positions. And some of those were kind of employed, some of them were contract,
Mm.
and I was still a contractor, even though I was essentially on a full-time kind of schedule. um, the that's always been my consulting practice, has always been kind of what informed my
Gotcha.
opinions and my theory of the market, if you will, because I've worked again with so many clients of all sort of stripes, that it all just gets incorporated into my framework for kind of solving whatever problem the client presents. But yeah, at the moment, it's the focus is client work to some degree, although that's not necessarily. I don't look to take on a huge amount of client work, because I also have a lot of other irons in the fire, and
Hmm.
there's a tool, game economy tool that I'm developing, and we got a grant from Figma for that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and that's that's one avenue that I think there's a lot of space there in within tools. That's another huge subject that we can sort of get into. There are a lot of live ops tools. There are a lot of data viz tools, but there aren't a lot of from scratch game economy building tools, and that's what we're trying to build. So there's that. There's the newsletter, and there's the LinkedIn side of things, which is I I kind of fell into because I started about a year ago with I think something like 1,400 followers, something like that, and it ended up ballooning a little bit. Now I'm at around 8,000 or something, which isn't huge. You know,
Mm.
it's all right.
It's nothing to sniff at either.
No, it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's a good number, but it's not. It wasn't like I had a target and I wanted to get there.
Yeah.
It very much grew around this stuff around Web3, which I was very vocal about, and kind of took a very hard stance as an insider because I used to do some Web3 work alongside other consulting.
Mm.
So I very much knew I was speaking from inside the bubble and kind of saying all the stuff that wasn't meant to be said out loud. Like I was saying the quiet part out loud because some of the stuff that I'd seen was just completely unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of ended up evolving and evolving into more classic kind of sides of game monetization, game economy consulting, and I ended up getting clients that are classic mobile, for instance, off the back of that because when you I'm trying to to say without like bigging myself up.
No, you're fine. Big yourself up.
No, it's just when you're like saying it as it is, and you're willing to not stand on on the law of silence and be and say that oh yeah the emperor's clothes are super nice.
Yeah.
The people they kind of see that and they're like okay then I can trust this person to give me a fairly. Sometimes you need to give fairly brutal feedback. Fairly not brutal because you are making it. You're not using brutal words, but like the reality is brutal, and you need to make it known somehow. So yeah, that ended up kind of growing out this LinkedIn presence, and it's sometimes a little bit more abrasive than I'd like it to be, but there's just so much fake positivity and so much toxic positivity and so much delusional just hyping that it's even with being a little bit more abrasive, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, but I know it turns some people off. That's fine. Doesn't need to be for everybody, but yeah, even with that, it's still there's an audience for cutting through that noise. And I was not surprised at anyone, to be honest.
I mean, it's the classic thing, isn't it? I know that there's all the memes and jokes online about like that if I have to see one more, I'm excited to announce post when it's like no one's actually that excited to announce.
The LinkedIn cringe kind of Reddit and whatnot. Yeah, and that has to do with LinkedIn, but that has to do with Twitter's used to be much the same, and I think pretty much any social media that'll get you leads. That's kind of what you need to do.
Yeah.
But I'm tempted. I'm not going to say I wasn't tempted to start doing. I did get messages of, oh, if you use this format, I'm like, here's how this thing made my client $150,000. It's like I don't want to grow like that because I wouldn't know what to do with it. I genuinely, I start getting all sorts of Web3 sponsorship things, and I'd just be like, gagging.
Yeah, I mean, it can cause a lot more harm than good, can't it? I think Amir Satvat, I'm sure you know of him. He's like probably the biggest gaming voice on LinkedIn right now. Amir Satvat.
Yeah, Amir.
And he has made like a few posts about it where he's had to come out and say like the amount of times he's had like huge offers from brands or companies or people or studios, and he's had to turn them all down because it adds this level of complexity then of this is something that's being represented that's a reflection on me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know Amir, and I respect what he's doing. this is, and I think this is gonna make me look fairly bad, but Amir actually has me blocked on LinkedIn because I was snarky to him one time.
Oh,
It
gotcha.
was it was snark. It was not. I wasn't mean or anything.
Yeah,
It was just snark, and I think he has no patience for that. It's just like he gets probably so much,
that's it. He has so many people in his comment
yeah, it was just
sections.
like instant, and
Yeah.
that's all fine. If he does end up listening, I just want to say, there was no ill intent, and I respect the absolute,
Yeah.
to to the absolute utmost extent what he's doing and the way he's helping people. Obviously, I wouldn't be as positive about it. Like, I think, being that positive about the industry with my experience about like of it, I tend to be a little bit suspicious of that. Not for great reason, just because like I have my experience, but overall, like obviously he's doing the Lord's work there, and yeah, I like everyone else, I massively appreciate what he's doing, and yeah, that's kind of what it you know what happens where you get these LinkedIn people who have this hockey stick growth, and they're like, "This is how I got 100,000 followers in like 4 days," and that's fine. You can do that. That's perfectly valid. But like, there's genuinely nothing there.
Mm.
Once you go past the little hacks, like you get to 100,000, and you have 100,000 of what? Because you're gonna need to do more at one point. Like there's no landing that ship. There's no that plane. There's anyways. I don't mean to rag on him. And it's yeah, growing the LinkedIn whatever, like that's a means to an end. I just ended up figuring out that you need an audience to do pretty much anything you want to do these days.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think, I mean, when it comes to you and me, obviously, it's like you guys are almost two sides of the same coin. You said like people sometimes need a little bit of like ruthlessness or a bit of, brutal kind of feedback. At the same time, as like I would say, with all the layoffs that have happened, the kind of genuine positivity that has nothing that is being like, there's no agenda to it is probably very helpful for a lot of people on that end.
Yeah, no,
But on
absolutely.
and what you were saying about the kind of growing your following, it's so true. Because I've seen it happen to people where they have this huge following, but the problem is like you said, what do you do with that? Any genuine follower that wants to follow you and like that you can then utilize, you need to have content that is going to continue appealing to the reason why they followed you. And if you just do a bunch of gimmicks and generate those followers, it's like, well, you have no idea what it is that the people that are following you like. There's no kind of common basis and like rule about why they've all followed you. So then it's going to be like zero interaction, zero basis for this kind of micro community that you built behind yourself.
Uh, there's this thing that is not really true of other industries that I've seen, where well maybe it is, but like to in games it just seems very exaggerated, where because everyone, like a lot of people, they consider themselves gamers first, and there's this gamer identity. Whenever you say something about the industry, they take it as an attack, and it's like, oh, you can't make the industry look bad. You're making the industry look bad. The industry should look good. Like you're kind of against the industry. It's just very tiresome and just so widespread.
Mm.
Where yeah, you will get people knocking the movie industry or the publishing industry. You'll get authors like talk about publishers or directors talk about other directors and go like, oh, that guy's movie is derivative, or you get Scorsese talk about MCU films. Go like, oh, it's what I don't know what he used the G word, didn't he? It was cultural G word, I think. Anyways, yeah, it was very bombastic and very like, but in the industry you don't get it. It's very very tricky to talk
Mm.
about problems in the industry, except in like the most solemn terms, in the most like general, like there's a general problem in the industry, but it's still an amazing industry. But you have to, to just kind of hint at it and be like super careful because
Mm.
yeah, and
I mean,
then
I've had it happen even at my level, and I'm by no means, a figurehead within the industry, but I've been freelancing in the space for a few years now. And I have this network as you do, you build up other freelancers that do this similar kind of work as you, and we all can stay in touch. And I remember it was only a few months ago I made a post, and it was about the whole Ubisoft releasing a game, and then if you wanted early access to the game, it was an extra £20 or $20, and then if you wanted the extra missions, it was an extra $20, and so on. And there were all these extra things where if you actually wanted to play the full game, it ended up being about double the price. And I made this big post on LinkedIn that was like, "This is ridiculous," and there was this kind of collective taking at the breath, like, "Ooh, you're
yep,
gonna get in trouble for saying
exactly.
that." And it's like we're not naughty schoolboys that are running around telling the teachers that they don't know what they're talking about. You should be able to speak your mind about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an industry of professionals, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, professionals don't they don't walk around on eggshells around each other and go like, oh, hey, there's this general issue with the industry. Looking at you, I'm talking to you about your thing, but like it's just a general issue in the industry, and somebody should do something about it. I'm not saying anyone is specific about the thing that I didn't name, done by the guy, by the person who I didn't name. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with obviously the very normalized toxicity in gamer communities because that's kind of the default uh, mode of discourse where you don't like whatever in a game, you go scream at the devs on Twitter. That's
Mm-hmm.
just understood, right? You go review bomb, you go like whatever it is, you just and that that'll create it's very understandable. That'll create a culture of kind of just caution and extreme sensitivity to criticism. But there's this other side, which is antagonism towards press. Like so many devs, they are just like, oh, the press is horrible. They're just the enemy. I wish they all disappeared. And I'm just, what? Why? How did we get here? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's I used to be a games journalist as well. Well, not like you know, not IGN or whatever. It was like Pocket Gamer a while ago, and I was a freelancer, and I did gamer, and I still like I understand kind of the way it works and how you're viewed. And I understand the disconnect is what I'm trying to say. And it's just there's such a wall between um, devs and journalists, and it's all just so volatile and so high stakes. Like
Mm-hmm.
between journalists and devs, between devs and players, between journalists and players, it's all just so high stakes. Everything's super high stakes. Like there's no tolerance for anything but the daintiest and the most careful discourse between professionals. Whereas if you're a player, you can basically just say anything and nobody
Oh
will
yeah.
do anything to you. And that's kind of backwards. Like professionals should be able to be fairly honest and kind of if you I don't know if you recall there was a few weeks ago um, there was I think the Hooded Horse CEO. He took exception to someone criticizing his game. Basically, it was a, I think it was Manor Lords. Yeah, Manor Lords.
Mm.
And
Oh
uh,
yeah, that's absolutely blown up, hasn't it? It's like
yeah,
the.
no, it has. And for from I haven't really dug into it. But the idea was a very experienced kind of CEO, designer. He gave his thoughts on the game and essentially said, "Oh, there's not really a lot of content. I dropped off at one point. Here's how you could kind of you could have had like a better content plan or done procedural generation because this type of genre needs kind of this type of structure in place and a certain amount of content because that's sort of the expectation." And the reply from the Hooded Horse CEO was just overblown and so touchy and so, but like in kind of the worst kind of victim mentality way, because it was like, oh, this encourages crunch and we don't need the game did
Ah, gosh,
amazing
yeah.
and it was good and critics loved it and players loved it and everyone loved it. It's like, yeah, it's something can be very loved, but it can still, from a craft perspective, for someone who's and this wasn't the person criticizing. They weren't like a CEO who is known for crunch or who's like not made a game before. This was someone who's an actual craftsperson who knows what they're talking about, and they're telling you, listen, here's how I think the game could have been improved on a craft level. And it was just like, no, you're trying to make us crunch and to impose huge content expectations on, and it's just so unnecessary. And this is where you can sort of tell that there's this disconnect between kind of people who have been in the games industry a long time and who know kind of the way things are built, and people are kind of now kind of getting into it, and they're having some success. I mean, there's a lot of indies and a lot of indie publishers and a lot of indie investors, or even not indie, even outside the indie space. There's a lot of kind of new blood coming into the industry, and that's all great. That's fine, but like it comes with its own kind of defensiveness and with its own high stakes, discourse of like, oh, we're doing things a certain way, and we don't need to understand how things are done in the games industry because we're crushing it right now, and it's just, yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean that's gonna last, right?
Yeah.
It's, so yeah, rather than everyone getting together talking about sustainability, and there are all these very high stakes, very volatile kind of groups, and they all kind of hack at each other, and it kind of makes it hard to put the industry on a more sustainable footing economically as well.
I mean, when you talk about, obviously, just when we kind of got onto this topic, you're talking about it's important to be able to call out certain problems in the industry or with the studio or whatever it might be that, adult professionals should be able to have kind of stern but fair discourse with each other. But I mean, on that note, if is there one, and if there is, what would it be? What is the thing you feel like this is one of the biggest problems the industry's facing right now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wrote about this quite a bit. What I think most people in the industry don't understand, or most decision makers in the industry don't understand, is that there hasn't been a game industry for a while. Like there's no game industry. It doesn't exist. We say the game industry, what we mean is it's this sort of extension of the tech industry because it depends on the tech industry. It's all built on the tech industry. There's no, like, you can talk about, for instance, a board game industry, because board game, it's some cardboard, it's some rules. You ship out the cardboard to whatever, some plastic. You ship out the thing, the player gets it, and that's fine. There's nothing in between you and the player, or very little. You have, sure, you have publishers, you have kind of fabricators, or like factories is kind of a overstating the case, but you have people who specialize in manufacturing board games. But all in all, you have the designers, and in between them and the players, there's not, there are not these the publishers and the manufacturers. They don't control the market, but in games, tech companies control the market. They are the market. They are the industry, and there isn't a single company. There's a single big game company that is just a game company.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft is also a cloud company. They're also, an OS company, an electronics company. Sony, same thing. They make TVs and they make, smartphones, and they make all sorts of other things. And they are pretty much an electronics company first. Microsoft is a software company first. Nintendo is maybe the only game company that's kind of straight up just primarily a game company, but they are the smallest of the big three for a reason, and that's not even getting into Apple and Google, and essentially how the mobile game industry is kind of an outgrowth of
Mm.
mobile tech industry and the mobile ad industry. So yeah, that I think is the biggest. Like, the layoffs aren't driven by big game companies not wanting to make games anymore, not wanting to make big games, or kind of not caring about the people that work for them. Like, it's none of that. It's literally the tech company calculus of increasing their share prices, of keeping their shareholders happy in aggregate, like with the entire Microsoft, not just
Mm.
Xbox. Like, Xbox is a line item, right? So yeah, that's what it boils down to. That's why there are that, and that's the biggest problem, that the game industry is an outgrowth of the tech industry. And movies used to be that way too. It used to be that the way movies became better at one point was you invested in technology. Like, the films themselves, they weren't that great. They barely had plots. The early ones, it was just, oh, a train is coming towards you, or a guy hits another guy on the head with a chair, and that's it. That was the whole film, right? And then they got progressively complex, and they had plots, and they had started adding writing and acting and all that. But it was a tech industry to start. You got, talkies, and you got Technicolor, and you got all these technological advancements, and it was an outgrowth of the tech industry at that time, whatever tech industry there was. Um, but we're kind of in the same stage right now. Like, we are in the stage of, it's much more important to have the tech to, you know, make the train come towards you and give you a shock, and you're like, oh my god, it was such a realistic train. Like, you care a lot more about that than having the guy on the train, emote, and having a well written backstory for the guy on the train. Like, that's secondary.
Mm.
So that's what is driving the layoffs right now. I know it's a little bit of a stretch. I know I'm going like all the way somewhere else, but that's kind of why the layoffs are happening, because people making the games, they're not really important enough, and you can take this out of context, and you can just end my career. People making games are not important. That's not it. They don't have enough leverage, because
Mm.
the creative part of the game itself is not important to the economics of game making. It's not important enough. It's important to some extent, but it's not important enough. The tech is much more important. The IP is much more important, because that's what gives leverage to companies, that want to increase their share price. What they buy new IP. Like, if you had, billions of dollars flying around, and you have the choice of standing up a new studio for new IP, hire experienced people, they have like a 95% failure rate, or to buy another studio with IP. Like, you go for the second one every
Hmm.
time, because the risk is so much lower, and your shareholders are going to be much much happier. So that's kind of the biggest problem, biggest risk. That's the biggest problem in the industry. Hopefully that would make sense.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to hear about. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really appreciate you coming on, and I will link your newsletter in the description as well. So if there's anything else you want me to put down there, I'm happy to do so. But it was an absolute pleasure having you on, mate. Honestly.
Yeah, cheers. Time to go on, but yeah, no, absolutely.
Hey, there's nothing worse than a host that doesn't let his guests speak. So.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. Cheers for having me on. And yeah, I'll have a look at the finished product and kind of let you know if there's anything. But yeah, it was just a nice chill.